Previously, two of the most hapless NFL franchises are now amongst the NFL's most improved. We got all that and much more on today's episode of Locked On NFL.
You are Locked On NFL, your daily NFL podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, football fans, and welcome into another episode of Locked On NFL, where we bring you all the biggest stories from around the National Football League every single day here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It is Tuesday, so you've got Luke Braun at Luke Braun NFL on your favorite social media, myself, Ross Jackson, at Ross Jackson Nolan. On today's episode, we're going to get into our Yike and Like, which we dig through every single week, something we liked from the week, something we didn't like from the week, leading off. Does win now free agency for a signing ever actually work? We're going to get to that here in a little bit. We're also going to take a look at why the AFC playoff picture clearly makes the AFC look like the better team, the better conference in the NFL, as we try to look at teams that missed the playoffs last year, but might make the playoffs here in 2024. And to kick us all off, we're taking a look at the most improved teams in the NFL. Both Luke and I picked a team. You already know who we're discussing: Houston Texans and the Washington Commanders. These two teams, big time improvements. Let's break down why. We appreciate you so much on today's episode for joining us and for being a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, making us your first listen of the day every day, and for being an everydayer here on the show. Make sure you go and check out our friends over at FanDuel, because today's episode is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. You can head over there as a new customer, get $150 in bonus bets by winning any $5 bet as your first bet. That's $150 in bonus bets. Just head over to FanDuel.com/locked-on today to get started. So, Luke, I picked the Washington Commanders. You picked the Houston Texans as the most improved teams going into the 2024 season. Why the Houston Texans for you?
So there's two things that the Texans did that I liked a lot. Both of their acquisition, or have going for them, I should say. Their acquisitions obviously are going to headline most things like this. They get Danielle Hunter, the premier edge rusher in the class. They make this big trade for Stefon Diggs. They pick up a lot of really interesting corners, kind of on buy lows, these kind of Jeff Okudah, CJ Henderson kind of acquisitions. But the thing for me with the Texans is they've got a lot of young players that feel really ready to take another step. Big one is CJ Stroud, of course, even though he was really good last year. That move, when you have a good rookie year, that move from year one to year two, oftentimes that's where you hit light speed, you know?
Yep.
But also like Derek Stingley, who was hurt and kind of fell under, he was the third overall pick, fell off of everybody's radar, had a pretty good year last year, and kind of feels like he's starting to prove why he was the third overall pick. Still kind of eclipsed by Sauce Gardner. I'm sure Texans fans are upset about that, but feels like he's ready to take the leap into being a better, like a true number one cornerback. And that means that all those sort of reclamation project types that you signed are competing for all one job. You only need one of them to actually be good and win that job. Guys like Jimmy Ward in the building, Danico Autry, whatever he's got left in the tank, I guess. And, you know, guys like Tank Dell and Noah Brown, who had these sort of really interesting seasons, ready to maybe thrive in a lesser role now that Stefon Diggs is in the building. And perhaps you get better efficiency out of those guys and you don't have to ask as much of those guys. It just feels like a team that's built to go from, you know, divisional round underdog to genuine AFC contender.
Yeah, I would have to agree with you here. I've been high on the Houston Texans all offseason long, and as they've done more and as they've added more talent, it's gotten more and more exciting throughout. I hope that Tank Dell ends up staying healthy this season. Of course, he had the unfortunate offseason situation as well, but seems to have already made his recovery from that, which is fantastic. And so just being able to see
volume
him
helps with that too, you know?
Yeah, that's true too. And so being able to see him maybe take another step as this like electrifying player with the ball in his hands, playing a specific role that elevates that while having now greater support at that wide receiver position, I think goes a really long way. And then you're right. I mean, CJ Stroud coming off of a fantastic rookie year, going into his second season, you expect that he's only going to get better from there. And that alone, the quarterback play change that's enough to say most improved. But then you look at all the other moves as you laid out. It's hard not to look as the Houston Texans right now as the favorite in their division and the AFC South. I think it's fair to say as a playoff team last year, and then coming back and having improved. It feels like over the course of this offseason. Team that I chose was the Washington Commanders. For me, it all starts at the quarterback spot, upgrading from Sam Howell to Jayden Daniels. And I get that it's an unknown right now, Jayden Daniels, like just to be fair and arguing against myself, he is a rookie. We haven't seen him play in the NFL yet. I get it. But look, I think that there were at least a few of us out there. There were dozens of us, that would have said, hey, I would have considered Jayden Daniels at 1-1 in the NFL draft this past year. So getting somebody that, if not even that, 1-2 in the draft and having that level of talent and adding that to your team, getting away from sort of the previous regime's investment, getting, kind of reuniting Jayden Daniels with a system that should feel familiar with him with Cliff Kingsbury over there in Washington, that goes a really, really long way for me, just starting at the quarterback position. But then you add in the way that they kind of revamped and built up their defense, adding Bobby Wagner, adding Frankie Louvu, adding Dorrance Armstrong, like just adding to those pressure players. Remember, they shipped off pressure players over the course of the past few years, trading away, Sweat, trading away Chase Young. They still have a couple of guys in the interior, but then they also add to their interior by drafting Johnny Newton out of Illinois. You can see the very clear direction that this team is wanting to go. They want to be very, very good at the quarterback spot, and they want to make things really, really challenging for the quarterback spot over on the defensive side. And pressure has a lot to do with that. PFF ranked the Washington Commanders last year 27th in slot coverage. I don't know 27th in what exactly, but 27th in slot coverage. And then adding a guy like Michigan's Mike Sandersell is somebody that brings a lot of that slot corner ability to it. He was considered the top slot corner in this year's draft, probably outside of a couple of other guys like the kid from Missouri, Abram. I can't remember his last name, but
Dennis Rakestraw.
Yeah. Who looked, fantastic at that position. And then you end up adding a guy like Mike Sandersell. It goes a long way for you. And then, of course, to continue to build up like their offensive line, their tight end position, adding Luke McCaffrey in the draft as well to give them another slot option at wide receiver. I just like very much what they've done. And they have the revamped coaching staff that might not necessarily take them to the playoffs the first year, but this allows you to sort of have the building blocks to say, hey, we've really improved, and therefore the trajectory for the near future has improved as well.
Yeah, it's the first time in a while I think Commanders fans can feel good about the actual overall direction of the team. I think the ownership change has a lot to do with it. I think that's worth pointing out. But honestly, you could kind of go there for a lot of the teams that added a QB, right? Like I'm sure the most popular answer to this question would be the Bears. We should mention them.
Yep.
Everybody's so excited about Caleb Williams and Rome Odunze. And kind of the build that they've been sort of slowly accumulating. Finally, we're ready to take it seriously and put expectations on them. And I think that's really the litmus test is not necessarily, who are we excited about? It's okay. Who is really disappointed if they don't make the playoffs? And that wasn't the case last year, right? Like last year you talked about the Texans. We talked about them kind of the same way we were talking about the Commanders now, where you go, well, if the QB is good, they don't need to be in a hurry, right? Like that, let's be patient. And then suddenly they're winning the division. They're winning playoff games and you're going, okay, they're real. And I think we look at the Bears. We don't have that patience now. Okay. You're here. Time to go. Obviously you should have some patience with your rookie quarterback. More on that in a second. But you look at the Bears and the Commanders. I don't think you feel that way about the Patriots. Drake May is a fun ad, but clearly they're a ways away from being, ready to be taken seriously.
They also hired like a high school coach as their wide receivers coach. So I'm a little bit concerned about their coaching staff as well.
Oh boy. They need to go through a dark period. They've been due. And then the Vikings and the Broncos, who also add their quarterbacks to builds that they've felt good about in the past. Obviously, the Falcons are in a little bit more of a deferred situation because Penix won't play. But
but they still added Kirk Cousins.
Adding Kirk Cousins, they're a pretty good answer to this question. Yeah.
Yeah, so they definitely, I was going to make sure we mentioned them too. I didn't want to come off as a Falcons hater just because I'm the Saints guy here, but I think the Falcons deserve, I do think that the Falcons deserve at least a nod in this conversation. Let's see what it all looks like on the field for all of these teams, but at least in the conversation right now, when it comes down to most improved, I like these two teams. And then there's a handful of other teams that absolutely deserve to be in this conversation as well. So let us know who you think most improved team in the 2024 NFL season is. While you do that, we're going to be taking a look at why the AFC is clearly the better conference this year. And you can see it a lot when it comes down to what teams didn't make the playoffs that could make the playoffs. There's just a lot more realistic answers in the AFC than there are in the NFC. Let's break that down next as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On NFL, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Today's episode of Locked On NFL is brought to you by Gametime, the best place to find last-minute tickets. If you are looking to get to your favorite team's home opener, perhaps, or a game abroad, there's so many of those this year. The schedule is out and you can go find those on Gametime, but it's also a really clutch thing when we're living in the world of 7-game playoff series and you're not sure if there's going to be a game 5 or a game 6 or not. And maybe you find out there's going to be a game 5 2 days before you need it. Go check it out on Gametime. You can save up to 60% buying last minute anyways, so there's no need to stress. And Gametime is upfront about everything. All in pricing. There's a lot going on about that in the news. Gametime already does it for you. So you can know exactly what you're paying right up front, no hidden fees, nothing underhanded, as well as your seat view. You can see exactly what your view is so you can make sure you're satisfied with it. Go download the Gametime app today or go to gametime.co. Use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off of your first purchase. That's code LOCKEDONNFL, LOCKEDON NFL for $20 off of your purchase. Terms apply.
All right, everybody, continuing on with today's episode of Locked On NFL. We appreciate you very much making us your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget to go and check out the Locked On Sports Today 24/7 stream. Tired of listening to those other networks and all the yelling and screaming? Well, make the switch over to Locked On Sports Today, where you get all the in-depth news, analysis, and breakdowns that you're looking for on all the biggest stories from the national experts that know the teams best and cover them each and every day. Make sure to go check that out today. Locked On Sports Today on YouTube, and you can also find it on the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Now, every year there are teams that did make the playoffs the year before that don't make the playoffs in the present year, and therefore there are teams that go the other way as well, teams that didn't make the playoffs previously that can and do make the playoffs in this season. Luke and I took a couple swings at teams that might not make the playoffs in 2024 that did in 2023. Now we're going to flip the script and look at those who missed in 2023 and could potentially make the playoffs here in 2024. Luke, I'm going to kick us off for this one. I picked my two teams here, both in the AFC, because look, I had a really, really hard time finding NFC teams that didn't make the playoffs last year that make sense to make the playoffs this year. And outside of the NFC South, and then maybe something weird in the NFC East opening up a spot somewhere else, it's really, really hard for me to pick an NFC team that can make it into the playoffs this year that missed last year. It's not a very good, it's not as good a division. Not as good a division in terms of its, or it might be in terms of its top talent, but in terms of like the parity of the division across the 16 teams as the AFC is. So I have two AFC teams. At the Cincinnati Bengals and the Jacksonville Jaguars. The Cincinnati Bengals feel like the obvious pick here because a large portion of the reason why they did not make the playoffs last year is because they lost Joe Burrow for several games. And he's back out there. You can go and check out Locked On Bengals. They did a great breakdown of his like return to practice and all those other things. And I think that alone is enough to say, okay, Cincinnati belongs right back in that conversation. But instead of them being a team that will make the playoffs, which is the way that we talked about them with Joe Burrow pre this injury, I think now post this injury, we have to talk about them as the team that could make the playoffs and that could challenge based upon the fact that they didn't last year. Ravens and Bengals might be the only two teams in the AFC North that I really feel good about. Cleveland, I expect a big step back there. I'm not expecting a lot from Deshaun Watson. I'm expecting fans to be clamoring for Jameis Winston as quickly as possible, right, because a lot of Jameis Winston fans just traveled up north. And then the Pittsburgh Steelers, I just don't think are there yet. I don't know if they know who their quarterback is. It's just there's a little bit too much. They're
not a Russell Wilson fan.
Yeah, I mean, especially after what we saw in Denver and all that. I mean, I would look at Russell Wilson the same way I looked at Carson Wentz going to Indianapolis, to where it was like, okay, well, if it's going to work anywhere, it's going to work there. That feels like the situation for Russell Wilson, but that doesn't mean that it's going to work, right? But if it is going to work with Mike Tomlin, does make a lot of sense, and with an Arthur Smith offense, could potentially make sense too. But I just like Cincinnati in that division. I like Cincinnati getting their quarterback back. I like the fact that Cincinnati didn't, hemorrhage a bunch of talent, regardless of how many news breaky, trade requests there were or were not. We're doing T. Higgins and Trey Hendrickson and all that. Those guys probably aren't going anywhere. And so I just feel really good about Cincinnati getting there. And then Jacksonville just feels like, look, they're in a division where they can challenge for the second spot in the division and potentially get that additional playoff spot, right? That extra playoff spot. And so I think that they can be right there with, the most experienced quarterback really, within the top of that division. So I feel really good about Cincy. I feel okay about Jacksonville. I think Cincy more so, but I think those are two teams that could challenge to get into the playoffs that missed the playoffs last year.
Insane miss by the league not putting either of the Texans-Jaguars games in prime time. I kind of feel like there's one in December that feels like a pretty good flex candidate. Mm-hmm. Those games are going to be huge. I think the Jaguars can absolutely challenge Houston for that. I think that's going to be a really competitive division. Mm-hmm. And honestly, my answer also comes from that division. It's the Colts.
Yeah.
I think
you got three real legitimate arguments there.
Yeah. And
who could win the division.
It's similar to the Bengals in that, like, look, the Colts lost their quarterback early in the year and everyone forgot about them. And I think it's kind of easy to keep forgetting about a team that's getting its quarterback back. And Anthony Richardson looked good. And I was a big Anthony Richardson fan going into, so it's not like I'm going that much further out of the projection and kind of already had. Not to mention other young players looking to possibly step up. I mean, they really love what they have in Michael Pittman there. Josh Downs maybe taking the next leap. And lest we forget, they were a Gardner Minshew team for a bunch of time.
Right.
It's, we can, right. They don't have to be that necessarily. You need the quarterback to stay healthy. But I think in a world where, and this is where I might actually kind of disagree with you about the AFC, it was also a lot easier to find AFC playoff teams that are going to fall away. I think that might be the team with the conference with the most turnover, but I don't know if you just swapped a bunch of AFC and NFC teams, if all the AFC teams would pop into the NFC and do. I think the AFC has a lot better quarterbacks. Mahomes, Allen, Lamar, Burrow, Lauren, all of these quarterbacks, not to mention Stroud and Richardson, these young guys. The quarterbacks of the AFC are better, which might be enough on its own to make the argument. But I do I could see a world where the AFC South has 3 playoff teams. When's the last time we could say that? That's really, it's such a cool, fun division now. We've been watching this over the last couple of years from, 2-3 years ago. I was furious at the AFC South for existing. Because it's making us watch Thursday night stinkers all the time. But now, with these quarterbacks, it's so much fun to see how that division has grown. Love the Colts, but we were just talking about the Falcons. And last week when we did this, I said, the Bucs were my team that falls away because I think it's just somebody else can win the NFC South. It just doesn't. It seems like, somebody's got to win the South, and a fourth one in a row just didn't feel like it. And a big part of that was the Falcons to me. They have pass catchers that should be way more productive than they are. If you're a fantasy player, you are acutely aware of this.
Yep.
And if Kirk Cousins can do anything, it is give volume, right? This is a team that's going to pass 50 times a game. And that's what Kirk Cousins wants to do. That's where he's at his best, is when he can get into the rhythm with a lot of volume. And I think that's what, Zach Robinson over there and Raheem Morris are going to want to do, are going to understand about him. Raheem Morris knows Kirk Cousins from their time back in Washington. They're familiar with each other. I think there's a chemistry there that really works out. Are they true NFC contenders above, the 49ers and Eagles or Cowboys or whoever you really believe in there, the Lions? I don't know if they quite rise to that level, but I do see, I see why they're favored to win the NFC South. Yeah. I know the Falcons aren't exactly a spicy take there because they're their favored division team, but hey, it's what it is.
Yeah, that's a team that didn't make it last year. that looks ready and poised to potentially make it this year. That's exactly what we're looking for. As we highlight the AFC South, I do want to give a little bit of love to the Tennessee Titans. I don't see them as a playoff team just yet, but I do think they did some really nice things over the course of the offseason, like top down reconstructed that team to bring it into modernity, which I think was a really, really smart move. So I'm excited to see the AFC South division as a whole. And whoever those three teams are that sit atop it, or whoever those two teams are that sit atop it, however it goes. But I do want to give a little bit of shine over to the Tennessee Titans as well. Coming up next, we're going to take a look at our yike and our like, what we liked, what we didn't like from the week. And I'm going to start off with Patrick Queen being the next in what has been a long line of players that sign with teams when they say that they want to win now, but they sign with teams that don't have a win now identity. We got that coming up for you as we continue on and wrap up today's episode of Locked On NFL, proud part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Today's Locked On NFL episode is brought to you by FanDuel. It's America's number one sportsbook, and it's America's number one sportsbook in large part because they have all kinds of really cool promos going on all the time. Right now, if you go to FanDuel.com/lockedon, you make any $5 winning bet, you can get $150 back in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. That's 30-1 odds on something that you can get. It can be minus 1,000. You still get 30-1 odds on it. So go take advantage of that. You're not going to find anything like that anywhere else. Go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. It can be on anything. It can be on, say, a game in the NBA or NHL finals. It can be a home run prop in MLB. It can be an NFL future. Whatever it is, if you win, you get $150 back in bonus bets at FanDuel.com/lockedon. Make every playoff shot count. FanDuel, America's number one sportsbook.
All right, everybody, continuing on and wrapping up today's episode of Locked On NFL. Every week, Luke and I like to give you our yike and our like from the week, the things that we liked, the things that we didn't like from the week before. And I'm going to start us off with my yike, Luke. I'm looking at Patrick Queen, former Baltimore Ravens linebacker, who signed with the Pittsburgh Steelers this offseason. And in a conversation with media, mentioned that he took like $4 or $5 million less than up to 5 different teams that were offering him. He said he had about 15 teams that he talked to, 5 teams that actually made full-on contract offers, and that some of those teams had offered him upwards of $17 million to go to their team. And he chose the Pittsburgh Steelers because he didn't want to go to a rebuild situation, and he wanted to win now. And I think it might be unfair, although funny, to say that the Pittsburgh Steelers aren't necessarily not in a rebuild situation. I think they're probably, if anything else, in kind of the reload or retool conversation, as NFL GMs love to call their rebuilds.
As far as the Steelers will ever go.
Right.
They're never
gonna
Patriots on this.
Yeah, exactly. And that's okay.
Well, the Patriots have just kind of like worn away over time.
Yeah. That was erosion is all that was, and everything. But like for the Steelers, the Saints, Philadelphia Eagles, like there are just teams that just manage things differently than other teams. And a lot of them just want to try to keep as much as they can together. And Pittsburgh is definitely one of those spots, but they did undergo a lot of change this offseason. They're kind of the embodiment right now in the NFL of the team with 2 quarterbacks and therefore no quarterbacks. So we'll see exactly what happens there in the Russell Wilson, Justin Fields situation. I believe you're looking at Russell Wilson as the clear starter, but then seeing how you develop Justin Fields over time. And then the next piece is just down to like the rest of that team and then the division. Like we mentioned, Baltimore and Cincy feel like they're the ones that sit atop the division. So coming over to Pittsburgh and like hoping to be in a win now situation just doesn't really feel like that's going to be the case there. But maybe I'm wrong. But we've seen this before. Gerald McCoy did this years ago, said he wanted to go to a competitor and that he was going to sign with the team. He wasn't worried about the money, all this other stuff. And then ended up with the Carolina Panthers back after the Carolina Panthers had like their most relevant stances. And we've seen this with several other players from around the NFL as well, who say, I want to go somewhere where I'm going to win. I'm not worried about the money. And then they go and they take a really nice contract and then they don't win. And I think Patrick Queen might be next in line. But he did say he wants to go somewhere to where he can win now and then worry about making money later. I don't think this was the right team if that was the case. I think landing in Pittsburgh was a good spot for him, but I don't think for that reason that should check the box for him.
It's such a funny thing to say after leaving Baltimore.
Right. Right. Yes.
I mean, I don't know. It's okay to lie on the podium. My I'll do my right now, and I'm not saying this as a Vikings fan rival to the Chicago Bears. Genuinely, I think it's good for Caleb Williams, but he has had a couple of struggles in minicamp, is what I'll say. The specifics aren't important. You don't need to care about it. It's just minicamp. But to the point where like reporters were asking questions like, "Whoa, rough day, dude. How you feeling about it?" It just seemed like the defense had a better day than the offense. This will happen. The minicamp is not a great time evaluatively anyways. Like everybody's in shorts. You're kind of doing 7-on-7. You're learning new concepts. You're learning new things. But this is good for Caleb Williams. Like we need to emphasize that it is good to mess up in practice. That's what practice is for, is to mess up and learn from it. You don't want to see somebody show up and just be like pristine. That probably means they're not pushing hard enough. And this is a big Aaron Rodgers thing. Aaron Rodgers talks about this all the time, and I think he learned it from Brett Favre, honestly. Aaron Rodgers would always use minicamp and training camp to push and take way more risks than he would ever take in a game to get a sense of calibration for what he can and can't get away with the receivers he has, with especially as he got older, how his arm is feeling this year. That's what you want. And for Caleb Williams, who great prospect. Everybody was very excited about him. By no means a perfect prospect. If you thought Caleb Williams was a perfect prospect, I have a bridge to sell you. There are things to fix. When you are fixing them, you're going to look like a work in progress. You're going to be thinking a little bit. You're going to be a little slower. You're going to make mistakes. That's okay. It's okay it's the only sports is the only world where it's never okay to make a mistake ever. And the second you screw up, I was right about you. I hate it so much.
Yep.
A little bit of patience goes a long way. I know we just said that like there's expectations on the Bears now, but with Caleb Williams, a little bit of patience goes a long way. And I think that the fact that he's struggling a little bit means that they're approaching this properly. And I think it's good news for the Bears.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Drew Brees did the same thing. Like he always like took risks that he wouldn't ever take in a game in training camp and all this other stuff. The other thing that I always talk about with this too is it's good to have a player face adversity early in a controlled environment where you can watch them manage that adversity and bounce back from it. The transition to the NFL is very much a non-linear experience. You're going to have really, really good practices during rookie minicamp when everybody's working in your speed. Then you get to OTAs or voluntary minicamps, mandatory minicamps where you get more veterans, and then all of a sudden the game speeds up and all these other things. Like it is not a 1, 2, 3, 4 linear type of experience. It is all over the place. So yeah, I'm with you on that. My is that the New Orleans Saints paid their bills. So there was this whole story has been so weird. There was a story that came out from so the Saints are redoing, or the Saints, the state of Louisiana, and then the stadium team or whatever is rebuilding and doing a lot of renovating to the Caesars Superdome here in New Orleans, because we, as the city of New Orleans, are hosting the Super Bowl in 2025. So in the 2025 year for this season. And they're trying to make sure that they get all that done in time for the Super Bowl. Well, there was like an $11.5 million payment that the Saints were set to make that they didn't make because they had requested some type of documentation. And so they put out a statement saying, we wanted to pay, but we didn't get the documentation that we requested to confirm that like progress was being made. And so we didn't pay. And then the other place is going, what you talking about? Like what documents? We didn't, like a bill's a bill. Like you got to, and it was just such a weird situation to where I felt like I was reporting on, stocks, and like, this is not what I'm here for. I'm not here to be a businessman. And it's already so tough to like criticize NFL players for doing things that I couldn't possibly dream of doing on a football field. But then to have to turn around and like criticize an organization for like not paying bills when I probably have a late bill right now, like it just did not feel like the right room for me. So I'm glad it's over. And I'm glad that the city of New Orleans, which a lot of people are making this about the Super Bowl and everything like that. But I also think even before the Super Bowl, there are hometown fans that plan to come and see their hometown team in that stadium. And so getting those renovations done in time for the hometown fans to enjoy their hometown team is way more important. So I'm glad that that's just out of the way. And I'm glad that this is the last I'll probably ever have to talk about it.
It's always nice when really annoying talking points go away. So my yike is a bit of a bummer, but we should probably mention it and keep people informed. Brandon McManus and the Jacksonville Jaguars are the defendants in a lawsuit from two staff members on their flight. I think it was from London last year, alleging sexual assault against Brandon McManus. We can include a link to the details. There's a lot of good write-ups about the details of all of this. But essentially, Brandon McManus acting untoward, and the Jacksonville Jaguars also named in the lawsuit as not properly supervising their player and ensuring a safe environment for all of their staff members. I think that was the I think that was the wording. So this kind of thing always sucks. And guess what? The NFL has another opportunity to completely mishandle a situation like this. I'm sure this time it'll be awful.
Yeah, I'm sure this will go great.
Yeah, guess what? They're going to do something that doesn't make you happy again. Yike. It's not going to be good again. Yeah, and it never will be.
Rough couple of weeks for NFL kickers, man. Just a rough couple of weeks for NFL kickers.
I'd keep an eye on your kickers.
Oh yeah, and also do something when untoward behavior is reported to your organization. I can't believe that this is
when your
that's a
player's
whole
grinding up on the flight attendant and being weird, and it's clear that she's uncomfortable. Can anyone on that plane? I mean, forget the just brass of the Jaguars. Can a teammate do something? Can we hold each other accountable, please? Yeah, dudes, we got to do that for each other. All right, don't just let it happen. Come on now.
Yeah,
it's it's quarters. You can't say you didn't see it.
Right. We'll see how all that goes. Maybe Brandon McManus becomes the next piece of an improving Washington Commanders team that gets improved upon, as opposed to being an improvement, because he is now a Washington Commander. We just talked about them as most improved team. He might not be on the roster anymore, depending upon how all of this goes. So we'll see. Because I don't think Washington, of all teams right now, is going to want to deal with that. Considering what they just
they've had enough they've had enough such scandals. Yes.
So they might be closing the door on that one. We'll see how that all goes. All right, y'all, we appreciate you very much for joining us for another episode of Locked On NFL. Don't forget to come back tomorrow. James and Chris answering the biggest questions from around the National Football League. And of course, Luke and I will see you again next Tuesday when we return. You can find Luke on your favorite social media at Luke Braun NFL, myself at Ross Jackson Nola. We will see you here again soon. We appreciate you very much once again making us your first listen of the day and being it every day. Or here on Locked On NFL, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.